All right, welcome back to ABA exam review and the continuation of our RBT practice question series where we're going through another set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're turning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. A client often yells to gain attention. The technician begins reinforcing the client for tapping a peer on the shoulder instead. Over 2 weeks, yelling decreases while tapping increases. What procedure is the technician using? So we have a procedure question, and we want to know what the technician is using as far as the procedure goes. We know the client is yelling to gain attention. The technician is reinforcing the client for tapping a peer on the shoulder instead. So immediately, it looks like a differential reinforcement procedure. We've got our target behavior for decrease, which is yelling. And then we have our alternative behavior, which is tapping the peer on the shoulder. Over 2 weeks, yelling decreases, tapping increases. So the question really becomes, what type of differential reinforcement procedure is this technician using? So first, since we're teaching a replacement, we know it cannot be differential reinforcement of other behaviors. A DRO procedure does not teach a replacement. So now we have to ask ourselves, well, is the alternative behavior incompatible with the old behavior? Can you yell and also tap a peer on the shoulder at the same time? You can't. So that replacement behavior is not incompatible, which means it's going to be alternative. The only difference between the incompatible behavior and the alternative behavior, differential reinforcement, is the idea that one of those behaviors is incompatible, that replacement behavior, and if it's not, it's just going to be alternative. You're teaching a client to identify different items at the grocery store. The client always waits for partial verbal prompt before verbalizing the full name of an item. What should you likely start to do next? So prompting, we're always trying to think about how we can get rid of the prompt. Prompting becomes a temporary SD in place of our actual SD. In this case, if we want a client to identify items at a grocery store, we want the client to be able to look at an item and say what it is, whether that be because we want them to buy from a list, they're shopping on their own, whatever the reason may be. We don't want our verbal prompt to be that SD. Because what happens is you give the SD, and then the prompt comes, and then the response. So we want to get rid of this prompt as quickly as possible, especially in this case where the client is waiting for a partial verbal prompt. If the client is starting to wait for a prompt, that prompt dependency might be coming into play. So in this case, we have a goal, we're using a prompt. What do we want to do next? A, remove all prompts immediately to avoid prompt dependency. Where you can't just fade all prompts immediately, the client may stop responding altogether. We've got to do things systematically. We don't react or overreact, I should say, by just changing it all entirely. B, switch to a different target in case prompt dependency already exists. Again, that's not going to help our current target, which is identifying different items at the grocery store. If prompt dependency already exists, we need to address that before moving on to something else. C, only reinforce responses that are prompted. Well, that would be just strengthening the prompt as the SD. So what we need to do is begin a prompt fading procedure. Now that we know that this client is waiting for the partial verbal prompt before verbalizing the full name, we need to start fading out that verbal prompt and getting the client to say that full name with a less intrusive prompt or independently. When you start to see a client progressing, but also relying on a prompt, we've got to start removing that prompt as quickly as possible. We're always trying to fade those prompts out whenever we can. The client begins hitting their head on a desk with force during session. The behavior plan specifies a protective helmet should be used when aggression occurs. The caregiver asks the technician to wait before applying it, but the behavior is intensifying. What should the technician do? This is a very challenging situation for a technician because you have to listen to the supervisor, but you also have to listen to the stakeholder. So if you're in a situation where it's a crisis, who takes precedent? What are you to do? In this case, the client is hitting their head on a desk with force. The behavior plan says use a protective helmet when this aggression occurs. The caregiver says wait, but the behavior is intensifying. And so, as the behavior technician, you have the choice between following the crisis plan or following the parent's advice. And in general, as the technician, if you're given an instruction by the parent, you're going to try to proceed as much as you can with those instructions and then talk with your supervisor. In this case, though, the client is now in possible danger. And our number one priority is to keep the client safe. So even though this caregiver has told you, wait on the helmet, one, the plan says you should use the helmet, and your supervisor should have gone over that with the parent. Two, your number one goal here is to prevent harm. And so if the plan says to prevent harm, which is a crisis plan's purpose, then you need to use that protective helmet. So what should the technician do? A, follow the crisis plan by applying the helmet for safety. Yes, we have to. We've got to keep them safe first, and then we can go through the other steps. But safety is number one. Doing no harm is number one. Read all of our answer choices. B, ignore the plan and do what the caregiver requests. Can't just ignore this crisis plan. The crisis plan is one of those things that it's in place and needs to be followed exactly every time. C, wait to hear from the supervisor before taking action. You might not have enough time to wait for the supervisor. What if they're starting to really bang their head hard and hurting themselves? You've got to do something. D, remove themselves from the situation. You're in the situation. This is your client. You don't just back out and say it's not my problem. That crisis plan is there for a reason. It's there to follow the plan, then reach out to the supervisor and see what they want you to do. But the number one priority at first is safety. Keep this client safe, apply that helmet for safety, and then reach out to the supervisor, see where to go from there. Joanna is instructed to measure latency for a client brushing their teeth after being told time to brush. Sometimes the client starts right away, while other times they delay for over 2 minutes. What should Joanna record in this situation? So what is Joanna's job here? What is Joanna told to do? She is to measure latency. What does latency measure? Latency measures the time between an SD and the first response, right? Time in between response 1 and response 2 is going to be inter-response time. We are looking for latency, time between the SD and response 1. So in here, the client is told to brush, which sometimes they do right away. Other times they wait for 2 minutes. So sometimes latency is immediate. Sometimes latency is 2 minutes. The SD's time to brush. The response is starting brushing. So what is Joanna going to record in this situation? A, the number of times the client brushes during the session. Well, that's going to be a frequency, and it's not going to give us the information we need for latency. B, the length of time between the instruction and when brushing begins. Yes, instruction is the SD. Brushing begins, response. Length of time is here, so we're measuring. C, how many teeth the client brushes correctly. Again, just a frequency count, not what we're looking for. D, whether the toothbrush is used independently or with prompting. Again, not measuring latency and not measuring what Joanna is supposed to be measuring. She needs to measure time in between the SD and the response, so instruction and when brushing begins. Her answer here is B. A teenager often runs in the school hallway. The staff begins requiring the student to walk back to the start of the hallway each time they are caught running. Over the next 2 weeks, hallway running decreases significantly. What explains the change in behavior? All right, behavior change question. First thing we want to know, how did the behavior change? Did it increase or decrease? Well, hallway running decreases, so we know this behavior has decreased. If behavior decreases, it's due to either punishment or extinction. Reinforcement does not increase behavior. So if this teenager is running in the school hallway, and when they run, they now have to walk back to the start of the hallway each time they are caught running, what's happening? Is something being added, taken away, or withheld? Well, the punishment of going back to the start of the hallway is added, right? So that is being added to the situation, reducing the behavior. It looks like positive punishment. If you look at B, C, and D, they all have reinforcement. What's wrong with that? Well, reinforcement only increases. We know the behavior decreased. There's no way it can be reinforcement. So Very easy question. If you understand that reinforcement cannot decrease behavior, this has to be positive punishment. Thanks for watching. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials. When you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.